Now, Ms. McLellan, you're an employment specialist. There have been a number of companies in the United States that have actually started to implement mandatory vaccination among their employees. Can you tell me how this has gone in the United States? What has the reaction been? And do you think it's something we might see in Canada?
So this is something that we've been watching very closely. Our firm, we do more employer side work, so we're always interested to see what other employers out there are doing. In the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've seen a number of really large American employers, including Amazon, Walmart, Microsoft, Disney, Tyson, which is a huge meat packing and meat supplier company. And they've started to introduce mandates, particularly with their executive and their office staff first. They haven't quite gone so far as to introduce mandatory vaccines for all of their frontline workers yet. But that they expect that's going to be coming in the fall. And I do think that Canadian employers, once they see American employers do it and they see American workers broadly go along with it, I think Canadian employers will be more tempted to look at implementing those sorts of policies, particularly as we get into cold and flu season in the fall.
And in your view, do you think that this causes sort of privacy concerns? Just briefly, because I want to give Mr. Bowman an opportunity to comment as well.
The privacy rights of employees are incredibly important, and that's going to be one of the biggest implications, one of the biggest factors employers should consider. And so if they are going to look at implementing these kinds of policies, it's going to be really important that their policy takes into account how to minimize the impacts on privacy rights, including how they're storing that information, what information they're actually requiring, are they retaining it, or are they just getting confirmation from the employee of their vaccine status.
Now, Mr. Bowman, what can you tell me about mandatory vaccination requirements that already exist, in your opinion, in Canada or elsewhere, and your opinion on those type of mandates?
Yeah, well, certainly France has instituted this, and, some people would say great success. They announced it and people signed up overnight, 1 million people. They also had riots in the street. And so it does occur, but, it can be very divisive. And I think one thing we have to remember as Canadians is, yes, we got off to a very difficult start with this pandemic, including vaccination, but we've rolled ahead. And one of the factors that's working for us is generally we have cohesion and, nationally in terms of how to proceed with this pandemic. We do risk that with mandatory. And, the concern I have with mandatory is it's not one size fits all. It has to be measured. We have to show that other methods have not worked. And more than that, it's scientifically, I'm not suggesting it's not scientifically grounded, but we need to know that vaccinated people with only vaccinated people, that the risks plummet substantially. Do we know that yet? I don't know. People have different opinions. So, it's not just what decision we make, but how we make them. And one of the things that worries me in the Canadian situation, when we hear our Prime Minister speaking about federal employees, we could be in a situation where, someone in a bank has to be vaccinated. You have to show vaccine proof to go for a glass of wine on an outdoor patio, but a kindergarten teacher wouldn't have to be vaccinated. It may not be coherent at all. And that would be absurd.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that Danica raised, this conflict among unionized workplaces. And I've found it really interesting that there have been so many calls on politicians to impose vaccine mandates on certain types of employees, when I have heard mostly silence from the unions representing those employees. If anything, I've heard resistance. Danica, what can you tell me about the history of the unions and their position on mandatory vaccines for other things like the flu?
So historically, and the reason when I say you probably can't impose a vaccine mandate if you are in a unionized context, that's because unions have historically grieved the introduction of these types of mandatory policies, like you said, with the flu vaccine, and even policies where there was it's called a vaccinate or mask. So either employees had to be vaccinated against the flu or they had to mask during flu season or during an outbreak. Even some of those policies have been subject to criticism by arbitrators. So you're right that unions haven't been coming out full-throatedly supporting vaccine mandates. And that's because they know that they will likely be in a position where to be seen by their members as promoting their privacy rights and defending their interests, they're going to have to start breathing these policies as well.